A huge thank you to Austin there. Now we're going to turn our attention a little bit further afield. Blockchains that have been turning many heads over the years. Can you guess what it is? We're talking Tezos. Here to share some insights are the co-creators, Kathleen and Arthur Breitman. And followed by that will be a panel discussion with Tezos developers, moderated by Tezos Commons Corey Shove.
Hello, Arthur. I think you're on mute.
That's correct. Hello. Let's try again.
That's what happens when I'm not around.
Yes.
Great. So this is, I guess, meant as a fireside chat, but obviously it's a little bit more intimate than usual because usually you don't interview your spouse when you're doing one of these things. But we'll try our best to not make too many inside jokes with one another. So yeah, I mean, just, Arthur, Tezos, obviously, like, the main network was launched in 2018. We're going on a few years of development. What are you most proud of over the last few years? And yeah, I'll leave it with that.
I would say that the overall the smoothness of the network, it's a network that's been running uninterrupted for the past few years, and the smoothness of the upgrades. The whole idea of Tezos was to have a network that could be governed by its holders and be able to incorporate changes through amendments, so get better over time by votes. And it was just an idea for the longest time, and there was a lot of theoretical objection to governance. And to a large extent, the thesis of Tezos have been completely validated. There's not a single new blockchain project or smart contract that doesn't talk today about governance. And yeah, we've been able, to do it and have very high levels of participation. So, routinely we have quorums around 60% of participation, with super majorities of 80% for adoption. So we have a very engaged community, and that's been able to upgrade the chain by doing this thing. So that's one thing I'm very, very proud of on the on the core side. And more recently, I think, and this is more of a phenomenon that started in spring of 2021, tons of adoption of the chain, specifically in the art world, and seeing just in a while people finding the chain and being able to use it for their projects. That's a fantastic feeling.
Yeah. And, you're a council member of the Tezos Foundation, which has done a number of sponsorships in the F1 space and, other sports, I guess, initiatives. Can you explain the thesis behind that? Because it's a little bit of a departure from what it historically has done.
Yeah, so without getting too deep into the strategy, because I think there's some interesting angle in there, but the general idea is that first it gives some brand awareness and brand exposure. You have the logos on the car, of course. People can see the logo. People can learn about the project, which is useful. In a day and age where there's a ton of competing blockchains, many options for people who want to build on different protocols. And having the validation of being used by large brands like McLaren or Red Bull Racing, or simply just brand exposure, knowing about the project, I think is quite useful. The second thing is that it's also a technical partnership, so it brings more assets to the Tezos chain. One thing we've seen Ethereum succeed at in the DeFi space has been having many assets. So if you wanted to build decentralized DEXs so that people can trade on a blockchain instead of trading on some centralized exchange, you want to have the assets. It's also why blockchains, for example, like Binance Smart Chain, have had some success because they have all the wrapped assets from Binance. So having the assets is a competitive advantage. And Tezos is building a competitive advantage in having premium NFT assets, from premium brands, from artists. So that's a second thing that it achieves. And the third one is there's also a whole network of corporate sponsors to these F1 races, which creates interesting introductions and interesting synergies between the different partners. So there's a lot of fruits that come out of this that are not necessarily obvious when you don't look at it closely. But I think these partnerships are tremendous.
Yeah. No, it's completely fair. And, to your point, there's been an increase in the smart contract calls on Tezos over the last year. To that end, what are the solutions that you're thinking of for scaling to, support a lot more transactions, hopefully in the future?
Yeah, we've had exponential growth in the number of smart contract calls. And I like to monitor smart contract calls as opposed to just transaction, because I would say today blockchains are not used too frequently for large volume payments. So smart contract call is really usage. It's not like people sending to an exchange or back from an exchange. It's not related to trading activities. It's exactly like people using the chain. And yeah, they've been growing like 30 or 50% month over month on average over the past year, close to that. So it's been tremendous growth, which is great. And Tezos does have, I would say, larger throughput than other blockchains, for example, like Ethereum. But it's also never, it was never built as a very high throughput blockchain, because the number one goal of the design of Tezos was to stay and remain very, very decentralized. Now, other chains are making this trade-off of wanting to be more centralized while having much higher throughput. The approach for Tezos has always been to focus on layer 2 scaling solutions. And I think that's been completely validated, because we are seeing now a lot of projects converge on a very, very similar design in terms of scaling, which is scaling via rollups. There's an article that I wrote in 2017 about why I thought it was a good idea to eschew sharding as a technique, and instead focus on an approach which has since then been rebranded as ZK rollup. And there's a company, Starkware, which has been quite successful with Starknet, building something of the sort. So a lot of these theses has been validated. I think that there's a narrower version of sharding that makes sense, which is data availability sharding, as opposed to execution sharding, which is far more complex and doesn't really give you a whole lot of benefits. So,
is there a mere mortal layman way of explaining that to people, or is that too the weeds?
I like to get in the weeds.
I know.
It's very most comfortable. So I would say you need some technological changes for chains to scale. If you look, for example, at trash collection in a city, if you double the number of trucks, you're going to collect about twice the amount of trash. Not 100% true, right? At some point, your streets are just like completely filled with trash collection trucks, and it doesn't work. But to a large extent, more trash collection trucks, more trash being collected. Right now, on a blockchain network, if you add more nodes, if you add more participants, you get more decentralized, but you don't get more throughput. Adding more computers does not equal to more transactions per second. You want to move to a model where the more computers you have in your network, the more transactions you can process. And that's one of the things I'm working on the Tezos side. And I think today there's a clear path to getting there that wasn't really there a few years ago.
Yeah, no, fair enough. So, I mean, I don't think anyone who's watching this will be surprised, but I'm your wife, right? And obviously I'm your biggest fan. There's some stuff that you've called, yes, well, most days, right now I am. Basically you've called some things in the past few years, and I think you've been validated, tenfold by most of your bold predictions. Like, you've done a really good job of that. What's something that you think now that most people would disagree with that you think they'll agree with in the future?
Oh, that's a good question. It depends who. There's a lot of things.
All right, smart enough.
I'll give you some counterintuitive things. Everyone thinks that building utility in NFT is very important, and then the future of NFTs is to unlock utility. And I think in some sense, you can decrease the value of an NFT by adding utility to it.
Is that because complexity makes it less engaging for the user? Like, what's the thesis there?
Because it makes it less pure. Imagine you have a piece of art, that has value. Imagine you have a piece of art that also lets you dry your best towels, and it's less, it's less valuable. Now, we're not talking about this, but of course, no one's suggesting something like this. But in some sense, there's a purity that happens when you don't have any utility, when you're just like a piece of digital art. And if somehow you let it do something, I think it kind of actually takes away from it. And everyone, is saying no, it's all going to be about the, a utility of NFT. And I don't say it. I think people are overly bullish about the whole metaverse thing, specifically when it involves 3D vision. I think people still believe in sharded execution. I think that's wrong. There's still a lot of proponents for just massive just on-chain scaling at Solana. I also don't think that's the right approach.
Mm-hmm. Well, wait, so that's a controversial statement. Why do you think that?
Because basically with a rollup, you get the same benefits and none of the drawbacks.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, what I've noticed is there's some sort of there's a fallacy that a lot of people commit when they analyze the space, which is there must be a trade-off if you're proposing a new technical solution. And sometimes it's just better is better, right? And so is there I know I have an example of that. is there an example of that you believe to be true, other than the rollups one that you just mentioned?
I mean, the obvious one is proof of stake.
Yeah,
you know,
that's what I'm thinking.
Yeah, absolutely. Other thing people are wrong of. I mean, that there's something absolutely magical into play to earn or like DeFi.
Well, now you're getting my goat, so I don't know.
I mean, I was saying there's a lot of thought leadership tweets, and there was one the other day that says like, oh my god, it just like changes everything because now the customers are the marketers, and like, yeah, that's called MLM, and it's very old. So
MLM, you mean multi-level marketing?
yeah. So are people going to play games in the future that are going to involve NFT? Yes. Will some people actually make money playing those games? Absolutely. Will the money that they make come primarily from being first and then selling to the people coming after? No. Or maybe there'll be some gambling application like this, but it's not a new paradigm. And when people say, "Oh my God, like 12-year-olds now will make hundreds of thousands of dollars," that's going to change everything. No, that's just no.
Well, it sounds frightening for parents first and foremost, but I tend to agree with you, and I think that's probably remarkably true. Fair enough. I guess I'll be able to fact check you on this since we do live together. But like, what keeps you up at night with respect to the space, with respect to, I mean, if you want to get into Tezos specific examples, you obviously can, but like obviously the drawback of doing open source development is that, you're kind of putting out you're exposing a lot of things to the world. I'm sure it's very stressful on a few axes, but what's something that you worry about most often?
Well, I think, you probably know that one of my mediocre superpowers is sleep. I am able to sleep. I'm able to sleep on command anytime, anywhere. So not much is keeping me up at night. But the thing that are constantly in my head is like being able to scale fast enough, like being able to get really, really quickly to a position where we scale. I think both for strategic reasons, being one of the first to really scale would be tremendous for Tezos, but also just like from pragmatic reason because of the increasing usage of the chain. I think it's quite important to do it. So that's I would say that's a big factor. That's a big thing that I am constantly thinking about.
And I think that one of our common gripes is that we have some accomplishments that have been earned through the Tezos ecosystem that we think are a little bit underrated. What is something that people discount too much when they look at Tezos as a project? And why do you think that?
Oh my God, I think what they discount is the level of dysfunction and how disrupting.
Not Tezos, right?
No. How disruptive litigation was for the past couple of years. I think a lot of people look at what happened in the Tezos ecosystem from 2018 to 2020, and they say like, oh well, nothing much happened in Tezos, and they just don't understand. Like the chaos that we went through. So I think people judging Tezos on the basis of like what went on during like 2018 2020 are completely missing the forest for the tree. Like it's staggering.
I mean, I don't know. I mean, it's still within that time. There were several upgrades. I mean, it's certainly not something to discount.
No, absolutely. It's done. It's something that was hurting adoption. It's something that like people. It's something that made people think in order to use a chain. That's a problem.
Well, I mean, one could also argue that the entire crypto space went through a bit of a winter at that time. So, certainly like adoption for everyone picked up basically in 2020. So, that I would push back a little bit and say like, okay, obviously I know firsthand that the litigation was a big pain in the ass. But certainly like, there was a lot of other stuff in the cryptocurrency space that was hindering adoption at the scale that we see today.
Sure, I know, absolutely. I see
one thing I get a lot of compliments on, which I'm very proud of in the Tezos ecosystem, is the, I guess the status of developer tooling, which has obviously gotten much, much better over the last year and a half or so. And I think that's also, as much as anything related to NFTs, contributed to adoption. And so I know that pretty much a lot of the actors in the cryptocurrency space and also in the Tezos ecosystem in particular. Is there anything with developer tooling that you're looking towards? What's the promise there?
Yeah, so the developer tooling has gotten tremendously better, I would say, over the past year and a half. Well, actually, even I would say 2 years. So that's been absolutely great. One of the promises of using a high-level language as a base language for the chain, like Mikkelsen, is formal verification and better security. But you do need tooling for that. So we've deployed some tooling for formal verification, Mishokok, for example. So some contracts have been formally verified, but you want tooling that is really that any smart contract developer is able to use. And there's some projects in the work, one called Takeria, for example, and a few others, to really try to integrate verification tool, not just formal verification, but other techniques like mutation testing, for example, static analysis, directly in the environment where developers work, so that they can have these guarantees directly in their IDE as a program. And so I think that's a big thing. The level of indexers also has improved tremendously. Whenever people build applications, very often they will need to index data from the chain. There's now several indexers, which application-specific indexers that are available. So that's a big one. And also, there's a bit of a flywheel here, because the more projects that are actually building on Tezos, the more usable feedback we get in terms of what developer tools are needed, where are the pain points. It's a lot easier to fix your pain points when someone is saying, ouch.
You need where they are.
Yeah, exactly.
No, fair enough. One popular trend for smart contract platforms that have launched after Tezos is to basically use the EVM pretty heavily. Obviously, there hasn't been that big of a push within the Tezos ecosystem to do this. Can you explain a little bit like the thesis behind that, if there is one, on your behalf, for not instigating a project like that? And if you do have anything to criticize of that strategy, like this might be a time to air it.
So a lot of so Tezos is a chain that was developed at the same time that Ethereum was being developed. So it's never it's a completely independent code base. It was not based off of Ethereum. A lot of blockchains that have launched later have essentially been forks of Ethereum, and generally just use Git. So for example, if you're looking at Binance Smart Chain, they take the Ethereum SDK and then they put Git on it, and voila. You have a
new blockchain,
tolerant chain with just guess, and you can slap a consensus algorithm, a new consensus. You slap a new consensus algorithm on top of guess, and you throw some money at it, and voila, new blockchain. So there's a lot of these projects. Tezos is not one of those.
Yeah,
there's a lot of benefits to it. Basically, it means that every project that was built on Ethereum can be copy pasted on these other networks, and it cannot be copy pasted. So if you're looking for adoption, I think it can be tough, because for developers they may say, well, I might as well move, copy my code base onto these other chains. Why would I completely rewrite it in a different language just for Tezos? So that's a limitation, but it also means that people who choose Tezos have a stronger commitment to the chain. It's a lot less opportunistic, which I think is good. I do think some form of EVM support can be useful. One thing which is often suggested is compiling down EVM to Mikkelsen, or compiling Solidity to Mikkelsen. The data types are slightly different, so there are some projects that do this, but you can't do it in a reliable way. So that's not really an option. The other option is since generic optimistic rollups are being built at the protocol level for Tezos, to have one of those optimistic rollups supports EVM as a legacy environment.
Fair enough. So I know you mentioned something that's kind of one of your bugbears, which is that every time someone comes up with a new consensus algorithm, they launch another blockchain. And in principle, we should embrace this, because the whole ethos around Tezos is adopting the best technologies that are available, and leveraging all of this different research and this movement in other parts of the ecosystem. What's an example of an innovation that you've seen recently, maybe over the last year or so, that you would like to adopt into the Tezos ecosystem because it's innovative in its own right and technically pioneering? Sure.
So innovative at the protocol level, or innovative at the smart
could be either. I would be more interested in the protocol level.
Protocol level. So again, I'm a huge fan of optimistic rollup with, and there's different flavor of it. I think the flavor that built by the type of optimistic rollup built, for example, by Arbitrum, is much stronger than the type of optimistic rollup built by Optimism. Preserve decentralization better. So optimistic rollup, I'm quite bullish upon. And other innovation at the protocol level, there's been some convergence, I think, in terms of the different techniques which are used for getting consensus. Data availability charting is a good one. I like the data availability charting approach that they're taking in Serum 2.0. And then there's like some fancy stuff at the protocol level that no one has really done, but I've seen discussed in paper, such as doing like global time lock encryption for the whole chain. There would be a long explanation, but that would be a neat feature that no one has really managed to build at the moment.
Mm-hmm.
And then on the smart contract side, there's been a ton of innovation it's kind of like there's two DeFi. There's one part of it which is like this amazing new financial primitives, which like quants who come from traditional finance are coming up with. And if you're looking at the output of Dave White, for example, at Paradigm, or Dan Robinson, you see these fantastic things. And then you have the others which are like, oh, we're going to print a bunch of tokens and like farm it, and like, oh my God, people are getting rich. It's certainly some new economics have been invented. And the first kind is amazing, and I'm really hoping to see more of that on Tezos.
Yeah, you and me both. Yeah, no, fair enough. And I think I know the answer to this, but like maybe for the sake of the audience here, I know who you talk to and who you enjoy discussing the space with. Other than yours truly, of course, who are your favorite thinkers in the cryptocurrency space?
So I named Dan Robinson. I really like. I really like.
We all like Dan Robinson and David Robinson for that matter.
Yes. I also I enjoy talking to Taran Chitra. I like Zaki Manian. I enjoy reading. Of course, like Vitalik Buterin. I enjoy his writing. Who else do I like there's a bunch of people. I don't want to give away Alpha, but
I don't think you would, because that all sounds like pretty prominent people, Arthur. So I don't think that's like really your secret sauce. But
it's not who I'm naming; it's who I'm not naming.
Yeah, fair enough. All right, you're taking the Telian view of this. Fair enough. I know that you also read a lot of other things outside of the cryptocurrency space. You're sort of a helpless nerd. I don't know what to do about it. But are there any sort of external influences other than pure economics and computer science thinkers who you find inspiration from?
I wouldn't say directly. I mean, probably, but I don't. I don't think of it this way. I try to grab as much information as I can and read a variety of things. And I guess I don't do the attribution in my head systematically unless I really try to think about it.
Well, for what it's worth, I do think you're very generous when you do actually like explicitly want to cite something or contribute to it.
Because I do think about it, but on top of my head like this, it's I would say it's a little difficult.
Yeah, no, fair enough. And I guess I think one of the virtues of the Tezos project, the prevailing one, the one that everyone knows about, is that it is a bit more grassroots and a bit more organic than a lot of the other projects that have come to the fore of the last few years. Mm-hmm. Do you think that's a virtue of the ecosystem in general? Obviously this is meant to be a sort of digital polity in a lot of ways. What has been the most surprising aspect of that? Do you think that this was a good conscious choice to basically try to make this as organic as humanly possible in terms of creating an ecosystem?
I would say like to summarize, I would say short-term weakness, long-term strengths.
Yeah.
Governance is a very long-term investment. In the stability and robustness of the network. You can go a lot faster by skewing it, but I think you lose. You miss out in the long run in having the thing. It's always tempting to be centralized and move faster because you centralize. And I think so far we've seen there's been like relatively few downsides of being very centralized in terms of success in the markets or in adoption. That's what's been demonstrated. But it's kind of like buying an insurance policy, and if you're buying an insurance policy and you pay the premium to your insurance policy, for the longest time periods you look like an idiot paying a premium and you're not getting anything, and someone who's not getting insured is not paying the premium, and then your house burns down, and then you're happy that
or a pandemic happens.
Yeah, or a pandemic happens. So it's one of the strategy which where you have this like rare payoffs once in a while and constant cost.
Yeah.
So yeah. That's
And
the way I look at it.
I'll ask a tough question just to close out, because I think we're running out of time. So basically, the Tezos position paper talks a lot about, basically creating an environment where, technical upgrades can be ratified. And it really has an emphasis on creating the greatest and best version of what's researched out there. Do you think that the emphasis on technical upgrades has been overstated, or what do you think is kind of the strength of focusing on that in the long run?
I mean, I think in the long run, the technical upgrades stop. The need for technical upgrade was that the project was, the space, was still in an early research phase. A lot of people were coming up with new ideas, and you need the flexibility to be both decentralized and adopt those new ideas. So it's very important to have governance. The longer, the more time passes, the more you can converge on a mechanism that just works. And you might say, well, in the long run, especially if you have, if you can move between different side chains or different rollups who each have their own protocol or rules, you might say, well, what's left of governance? And if you like narrow it down to one thing, it's about essentially issuance. And so right now the issuance is being used primarily to fund securities. There's a tiny portion of it which is also been used in a thing called liquidity baking to fund a liquidity pool on chain. But there's other things, there's other commons you can fund, and ultimately, yes, the governance becomes just about the issuance and less so about technical upgrades.
Yeah, no, completely fair. And I think you've said, essences of that in other interviews, but I think this is like a good explicit, clarification of it. And yeah, I mean, I think we're both really excited for NFTs in general. And I, for one, think that, kind of formalizing some versions of fandom is really great. There's been a big emphasis on STOs in the past in Tezos. Do you think that that's still a good use case? How would you defend that now, knowing what we do about the way that cryptocurrencies are used in 2021?
No, absolutely. I think STOs are not currently as interesting as it could be, but I think they're building a bedrock for something that is going to be very interesting. And I think they are interesting when they start composing with other smart contracts. There's basically a spectrum of STOs. On the one hand of the spectrum, you have some people who say, oh, well, I'm a transfer agent and I will hash the cap table and I would put the hash of cash table on a blockchain. Okay, that means nothing. And on the other side of the spectrum, you're going to say, I'm going to have a bearer share company in the Marshall Islands who will own shares in a Panama foundation, who will be the recipient of a trust in the Cook Islands. And yeah, and you can have these tokens. So there's basically a trade-off between, how I would say traditional and vanilla the legal structure is, and how flexible the ability to use the tokens on chain are. But there are several evolving legal frameworks which are making this easier. In particular, there's an interesting legal framework in Switzerland for that. There's also, I would say, technologies for whitelisting addresses on chain, which can allow the interaction of this thing. There's a protocol called Realties. They're on Ethereum, unfortunately, but they do tokenize real estate. For now. They tokenize real estate, and I think they use a constant product type market maker like Uniswap to do the tokens, but only to the registered participant. So this type of interaction between smart contracts and STOs, that's where I think it gets potentially very interesting. But you need a bit of a critical mass. I think for a single issuer, it can be interesting to have an STO, but where it gets really interesting is when you start building network effect and have large amounts of these assets who are on similar standards, who can interact with each other, who can take part in lending protocol.
And a part of what you've mentioned is effectively also jurisdictions wising up to recognizing these things as assets that can be transferred on a chain, so on and so forth, and legitimacy. So it does seem to be one of those where you have to wait and see what sort of regulatory environment emerges in certain jurisdictions as well to make it more interesting. So
Absolutely.
Cool. Well, I think we're out of time, and there's plenty of other awesome Tezos developers coming up next. So hopefully they'll continue to talk about all the awesome things happening on the chain. So thanks, Arthur.
Thank you very much.
Bye bye.
Bye bye.